Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 6th of March, 2026, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me by video link today are Patrick Henningsen and Basil Valentine. Now, later in the programme, Patrick's going to be covering the laying of hands on Trump and the latest display of Christian Zionist fervour from the United States. I'll be reporting on the British anti-terrorist police terrorism of children in the UK. And Basil's going to be reporting on the Starmer government's efforts to cover up Mandelstam's Epstein links. But of course, we are going to begin today with Iran. And Patrick, what's the latest?
Well, let's just bring us up to date. Thank you very much, Mike. It's great to be with you. We are officially in day 7 of the war, and this is a war that we're told now this week by the U.S. administration, or noise is being made as such, that this will be months long. This will be a months long campaign. So any ideas about a quick surgical conflict, you can put that to rest. It doesn't seem like that's going to happen. They're going all the way on this. Now, on the political dimension here, the War Powers Act came up to vote in the Senate and the House, and it was defeated. It was defeated by a narrow margin in the U.S. Senate, more or less a whip line vote. Only one Republican senator, Rand Paul, voted for the War Powers Act to restrain the president. And in the House, this is an effort sponsored by Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna, a bipartisan effort. This was also defeated. So you can go and look if you're interested at the individuals who voted, but it's being hailed by MAGA as a victory for America. But by everybody else, I don't think it's a very popular war. Looking at the polling, certainly you couldn't say that generally from the American people, but that's the split we have right now, unfortunately, over this conflict. Now, this is a really important report, and I wanted to highlight this here. Operation Epic Bill and the U.S. protection racket, the Gulf can't escape. Now, what is this? The U.S. have bases positioned all over the Persian Gulf. Obviously, the Gulf monarchies, the GCC countries, are paying a handsome fee for that privilege. But the question is, are the United States providing protection for these countries? And looks like right now, based on what we've seen this past week, the U.S. are drawing fire to those Gulf countries. So there's a kind of a reevaluation now taking place, and I think this was Iran's intention, was to impose a cost on these Gulf countries for hosting U.S. bases, which they're using as launching pads to attack the Islamic Republic of Iran. And so the numbers in this article, and this is a great research piece here, if you bring this article back up on screen by Freddie Ponton, it's a very well-researched piece, and you can just see exactly how the business arrangement is between the U.S. and the Gulf states, and the fact that this is now very much an underperforming relationship. In fact, it's you can look at it as a liability, and the numbers are pretty stark on this. And I encourage people to go look at this for themselves, because it's very revealing. And from a British perspective as well, this can be very enlightening. Now, on from that, the Gulf countries, there are reports, and this is really important. We're going to bring up this CNN report here. There are reports that Iran has targeted oil facilities, for instance, in Saudi Arabia. And Iran this is a deputy foreign minister here, absolutely categorically denying this. And so this raises a really important and quite profound question: who is attacking these Gulf countries' oil facilities, refineries, and so forth? If it's not Iran, who is it? The media has run with the talking point immediately in the reports that it was Iran, but Iran's denying it. Iran's policy is not to attack these facilities in the Gulf states for obvious reasons, because Iran doesn't want to open up the possibility of their own refineries and petroleum infrastructure and energy infrastructure being targeted as well. So that's the big question. So now we're left to try to answer that. And that brings us to this report. And this is, again, a report by Freddie Ponton up at 21stcenturywire.com. Now, in terms of the evidence of this claim, now Tucker Carlson is claiming here in this report that he has received information, or he has seen reports out of the Gulf that there have been arrests in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, in Doha and Riyadh, of Mossad agents, or people who have been picked up by Gulf intelligence services here, people who were tasked with carrying out kinetic operations, i.e., bombings on their soil, the Gulf states, and these would be classic false flag attacks, carefully designed to sow confusion and set the countries against each other. The obvious beneficiaries would be Israel and the United States. Now, this has also been mentioned in other Gulf media. We don't see anything reported on this in the Western media, so that's a big problem. That's I think we're ahead of ourselves here. I'm not sure, but yeah. On the Tucker Carlson report, that's an important question that needs to be asked. So, are there false flag attacks being carried out? That's the big question. And with the fog of war, this is going to be a big risk. And it's a reality that we're unfortunately going to have to face. Not just false flag attacks against maybe U.S. naval assets potentially, but also more likely against Gulf states. And we could even extend that conversation possibly to Cyprus, to RAF Equatorial. We'll talk about that later. So I thought those are really important reports to bring to people's attention, the links of which will be in the show notes for this program today. Now, that brings us to the question here on where this conflict is. Now, we're in an information war. Let's not fool ourselves. That's as much of an important aspect of this as anything. Now, if you look at the reporting on Ukraine over the last 4 years, you'll see all of the mainstream media, the Western media, have gone in with the White House saying that Russia was losing. Russia is on its last legs. The Russian military is falling apart. Those were all lies, but yet those were lies that were disseminated across the entirety of the mainstream and Western media. So what's to say that this isn't happening in this situation, in this war right now? And that's a question I'm going to pose. And Times of Israel here, U.S., Israel say Iran missile fire down, most launchers taken out as offensive ramps up. So they're claiming that as the B-2 bombing run happens, that half Iran's missile launchers have already been taken out in the first 6 days. Now, whether you believe that or not is another thing. But what's more important about this story here, and this is more or less reflected in the U.S. media coverage as well. So Israel and the U.S. are completely harmonized in terms of information ops, public-facing information. So the question is, why are they now going into a B-2 bombers? This is high-altitude and gravity bombs, 1,000, 2,000-pound bombs. These are designed for maximum damage. What this tells us, and what people need to look at, is that a lot of the U.S. precision munitions have been exhausted by this point. Now they're moving to gravity bombs. And this is a really disturbing development. And so you're talking about densely populated areas of people that are being bombed in a city like Tehran of 10 million. This harkens back to, Dresden or Operation Rolling Thunder, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos under Lyndon Baines Johnson, or the leveling of Pyongyang during the Korean War, or Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And you'll see the same talking point if this war drags on. This is going to cost too many American lives, or this war is going on too long. We must do something to end the war, to draw a line under. What does that mean? Well, that's another point as well on the nuclear question, which is being talked about more. So, again, with the Times of Israel, dozens of IRGC officers reportedly flee Lebanon over fears they could be targeted. So again, this is part of the overall information ops as well. So Lebanon, we'll speak later, has been dragged into this conflict here. And let's just play this video very briefly. The U.S. is doing a victory lap because they've sunk an Iranian naval frigate. Here is the latest press conference with the defense secretary, the Secretary of War, pardon me.
In the Indian Ocean, and we'll play it on the screen there, an American submarine sunk an Iranian warship that thought it was safe in international waters. Instead, it was sunk by a torpedo. Quiet death. The first sinking of an enemy ship by a torpedo since World War II. Like in that war, back when we were still the War Department, we are fighting to win.
Let me just add, that was an unarmed ship. It was taking part in a naval exercise invited by the Indian government. The sailors there were hosted beforehand with other international navies during an international naval exercise. And when they departed from the drill, from the exercise, the U.S. then targeted it and destroyed it and didn't bother to rescue or make any effort to rescue any of the sailors. So they're doing a victory lap like this is some great achievement, but this is a war crime, basically. So it's pretty breathtaking, actually. And there's more to come on this story. Now, here's Pete Hegseth announcing the Scorched Earth campaign, which is now beginning over the skies of Iran. But go ahead and roll this.
Flying over Tehran, flying over Iran, flying over their capital, flying over the IRGC, Iranian leaders looking up and seeing only U.S. and Israeli air power every minute of every day until we decide it's over. And Iran will be able to do nothing about it. B-2s, B-52s, B-1s, Predator drones, fighters, controlling the skies, picking targets. Death and destruction from the sky all day long. We're playing for keeps. Our warfighters have maximum authorities granted personally by the president and yours.
On every conceivable level, just that statement alone would be opening arguments for prosecution in a war crimes trial. So we can expand more on that later on, but over to you, Mike.
Yes, thank you very much for that, Patrick. Now, yesterday afternoon, then the news came that Israel was demanding that people evacuate the south of Lebanon, and then they suddenly decided that that wasn't good enough. They needed people to abandon the south of Beirut as well, and then, of course, what happened was bombing overnight. Today, then, as France 24 is reporting here, they've now expanded this now to the Bekaa Valley, which is to the northeast of Beirut and, of course, very close to the Syrian border. So clearly this is continuing to develop, and Israel continuing to, as Patrick just said, Lebanon being brought into this war. But Basil, let me welcome you to the program. What are your thoughts on this expansion into Lebanon? And I mean, what are Israeli politicians saying about it?
Well, it's a characteristic of the genocide in Palestine over the last couple of years that war crimes have been normalized and indeed downplayed by corporate media. And another is now unfolding in Lebanon, as you say, where Israel has ordered 500,000 people, the entire population of the southern suburbs of Beirut, to leave their homes yesterday, and then overnight launched a massive wave of attacks against these civilian areas. At least 11 people have been killed in the last 24 hours as a result of the bombing. It's worth pointing out that since the November 27, 2024 so-called ceasefire agreement, Israel has committed more violations than any other ceasefire in recorded human history, upwards of 10,000. But the heavy bombing of the Lebanese capital marks a further escalation. Displaced people, obviously including many women and children, have fled with just the clothes they were wearing and a few blankets, and with nowhere to go, are sleeping out in the open while the bombs rain down on their homes. It's It's worth remembering forced displacement is a prohibited act under international humanitarian law and qualifies as a war crime, but not a word from Western politicians. Only the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Rabina Shamdasani, has spoken out, saying Israel's military ground incursions into southern Lebanon, blanket displacement orders for the population of Beirut's suburbs, the Bekaa region, and the full area to the south of the Litani River are bringing more misery and suffering to an already weary population. She said in an official statement, "We urge the parties to step back from the brink of a major escalation of this conflict in Lebanon. We call instead for urgent de-escalation compliance with their obligations under Security Council Resolution 1701 and the faithful application of the 2024 ceasefire arrangements." But obviously with over 10,000 violations thereof, that seems wishful thinking. She went on to say the sovereignty of Lebanon and the human rights of its people must be respected. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz this morning took a very different position, saying that additional military positions have been taken inside enemy territory, vowing that the campaign will continue until Hezbollah is defeated. So very much a major second front ongoing there and developing by the hour.
But what's the situation with Israeli politicians?
Well, we've got a clip, I think. Yair Lapid, the leader of the opposition, speaking very frankly, and you get the frankest expressions of Israeli opinion from Israeli media, which of course are invariably underreported or ignored altogether in the West because we have to be shielded from what they say. But he's calling for ethnic cleansing, as we can hear now.
לגבי לבנון, אני אפילו קצת אלך קדימה ממה שרם אמר. אני חושב שבסוף לא יהיה לנו מנוס אלא לנסות ליצור בדרום לבנון איזה סוג של אזור סטרילי, לא ענק, אבל משהו בדומה קצת לקו הצהוב בעזה. זאת אומרת, אזור שאין בו כפרים הלבנונים, אלא הוא שטח נקי לגמרי בין הלבנוני האחרון ליישוב הישראלי הראשון. הייתי היום במטולה ובקריית שמונה, הם לא יכולים להמשיך לחיות ככה, יש גבול. וכן, זה יהיה לא אסתטי אולי או לא נעים לגרד 2-3 כפרים לבנונים, הם הביאו את זה על עצמם, בעיה שלהם. אף אחד לא אמר להם להפוך להיות מדינת האורח של ארגון טרור.
There we go. What more do you need to know? This is obviously part of a wider land grab, ultimately. Israel has said it intends to permanently occupy large swathes of southern Lebanon, doubtless as part of the Greater Israel Project, Mike.
Indeed. Now, what about the UK then? The main focus of UK's propaganda has been Cyprus, and the Starmer government has announced a further 4 Typhoon jets will be sent, although HMS Dragon can't get there for at least another week for reasons. But overnight, F-35s and Typhoons have been flying more missions over Qatar and Jordan, and as we'll see here in a second, or we'll hear in a second from Basil. But then John Healey has been continuing diplomatic efforts with initially the E5 defense ministers, that's France, Germany, Italy, Poland, and the UK, and then flying out to Cyprus to try to convince Cypriots that Britain has their backs. But let's just bring this defense intelligence release from Wednesday back on screen. And of course, that reported that the drone strike, which is alleged to have hit RAF Akrotiri, was not from Iran after all. It supposedly came from Lebanon, giving Israel justification, I suppose, as if it needed for what it's done in the last 24 hours. But Basil, the question then is, why is Cyprus so key?
Well, when Britain finally left Cyprus in 1960, it retained 2 sovereign base areas at Akrotiri and Dhekelia, as well as the highest point on the island where GCHQ has its listening installation, and they remain technically British territory, much to the irritation increasingly of the Cypriots themselves, with chants of British bases ringing out in recent days in Limassol, which is the nearest town to Akrotiri, with protesters calling for the removal of the UK military bases because they feel they have become a target. after the drones struck earlier this week, with every possibility of more to follow. Remember that Keir Starmer famously went to Akrotiri at the height of the genocide and said, you're doing great, lads, but we can't say what you're doing. Declassified Matt Kennard have done exhaustive work mapping out the intelligence flights that the UK was running out of Akrotiri on behalf of the Israelis. As I said, the other base is run by GCHQ and is an intelligence sharing operation with the Americans and therefore very possibly with the Israelis as well. And all this has naturally intensified debate in Cyprus over the presence of the British military on the island. Big campaign now underway. The bases are a remnant of the colonial and imperialist empire of Britain, said Melanie Steliou-Nicolaou, who is running for parliament, and there are protests ongoing outside the base pretty much every day.
Yes, thank you for that, Basil. Now, the other news that has been UK-related in particular is covered here by Sky. So we've got a headline here saying British warplanes shoot down multiple drones in Jordan. Well, the question is, Basil, what British assets are there in Jordan? Since this is a purely defensive action, according to Keir Starmer, what British assets are there in Jordan for them to protect?
Well, there aren't any, of course, but Jordan borders Israel. So it's a fair enough assumption. And the big, obvious glaring thing missing from all the reports is that if UK aircraft are operating over Jordan, then they are doing so to protect Israel. Simple as that.
Absolutely. And we have the disappointed idealist here on X making that exact point. This whole article manages to avoid stating the obvious, which is that if the RAF is shooting down drones over Jordan, then we're using UK planes and weapons to defend Israel, not UK bases. So this, therefore, Basil, is not a defensive action in the way that Starmer was suggesting in the House of Commons.
No, well, certainly not defending the UK or its interests, or indeed the United States, with whom, of course, we have a formal defense agreement via NATO. But, of course, remember, Mike, Israel is our ally. And I think in the last few years, some joint defense agreements have been signed, haven't they?
Well, we can talk more about that in extra. So thank you very much for that, Basil. Now, the question is then, what is the sort of attitude of former British serving officers? Well, here, I'm going to show a little bit of video in a second of General Sir Richard Shirreff, NATO's ex-Deputy Supreme Allied Commander for Europe. He was talking to Sky News about the special relationship. He said it was a fantasy and so on. But he had some particularly strong words to say about Trump and Hegseth in particular. Let's just have a brief listen.
Yeah, I can.
Right. So Keir Starmer kept talking about the special relationship in action. And I was wondering if you thought whether the UK is doing enough.
Well, let's just squash any idea of a special relationship. It does not exist. It is a complete fantasy. America does what America wants to do, and Britain's got to look after its interests. And any relationship with America has got to be based on self-interest. So that's the first point. I think the second point I'd make is that Britain shooting down drones, Britain engaged in offensive or defensive operations is invidious, frankly. The fact is that if Britain is involved, our hand is in the bangle. And the so what out of that is that we should not in any way, shape or form be involved with the Americans closely, because they are being led by a couple of gung-ho nutters like Trump and Hegseth without a proper strategy.
Patrick, that's some pretty strong language from somebody like that.
Well, he must have some quite strong reasons for making a statement like that. And I think what he's alluding to there is a type of a holy war. That's the shape. That's certainly how this conflict with Iran is being characterized in American conservative and Republican GOP circles, and of course with Christian Zionism in the ascendancy at the moment, and we're gonna sort of demonstrate and talk about how serious this is. Now, just to give you a taste, an entree, this is from the Oval Office just in the last 48 hours. Quite stunning, but I think people need to see. This is now standard in Washington. Go ahead.
We are honored to come before your presence today, lifting up the arms of our president. We pray for your continued blessing and favor to rest upon him. We pray for wisdom from heaven to flood his heart, his mind, and Lord, you will guide him in these challenging times that we're facing today. I pray for your grace and your protection over him. I pray for your grace and protection over our troops and all of our men and women serving in our armed forces. And Father, we just pray you'll continue to give our president the strength that he needs to lead our great nation as we come back to one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We pray your heavenly blessing upon him in Jesus' name. Amen.
So this can only be described as a type of Christian nationalist kind of wave, but attach it to overseas wars and wars of conquest, and it's quite a lethal cocktail. So, but that we saw even Tulsi Gabbard's posting these prayer huddles, days or right before the war was announced, or when the U.S. went to war a week ago. And so these people are fully in the full knowledge that this conflict was coming, but yet there's this outward display of piety and virtue for the public. There's a performative aspect to this, but it goes even deeper. And I want to draw people's attention to this report. Again, excellent work by Freddie Ponton here. This is one of the most detailed reports on this topic that's out there right now online. And again, we'll leave a link to this in the show notes, and the links outward in this, the research links are embedded in this article, are quite extraordinary. Crusader-in-Chief Pete Hegseth's Christian Zionist mission to help Israel confront Iran. It's much more than that. This is the segue to the Greater Israel Project, of course. But in here as well, let's look at a little bit closer. Now, this is Pete Hegseth. This is the Secretary of War, and emblazoned on his chest. And we did a report at UK Column approximately a year ago, after he's been confirmed as the Defense Secretary at the time. So we were on this topic and showing you these things a year ago, but we'll show you again. And so that is the Cross of Jerusalem. So this is Crusader iconography that's tattooed onto the body of the current self-styled Secretary of War, quote unquote, Pete Hegseth there. But let's take another look closer at some of the other tattoos. So this is him trying to motivate the troops previously in this year. That's a new tattoo he's got there. Just first on the top of his bicep, Dos Voit. Okay, this is God willeth. God will it, or rough translation there in Latin. And again, this is Crusader slogans and so forth that he's got tattooed. But below that is a new tattoo in Arabic, as you can see. And if you translate that, it's kafir, or infidel. Okay. And there's other interesting things he's got on his body, but I mean that's so the accusation is that Pete Hegseth's a religious fanatic, and that he is somewhat unhinged. I think you can tell that from some of his statements. He has a background. Accusations are alcoholism, not spousal abuse or partner abuse. He had to pay a settlement for some. The allegations are some kind of a violent altercation with his previous partner. So he has this kind of checkered past. A former guard at Gitmo, Guantanamo Bay. His highest rank was major in the military, and this is quite extraordinary. Someone would be promoted as a reservist, as a major, suddenly overnight after being a Fox News weekend host, and suddenly picked out of almost near obscurity to be the head of the Pentagon. And the question is why? And everyone was asking this question at the time. We knew the answer to that at the time, but many were asking the question, Why Pete Hegseth when there's probably a few thousand people more qualified, definitely within the U.S. military structure, to be the Secretary of Defense, to be in charge of the military in the United States? But why pick someone who's young, inexperienced, and with this problematic personal life and personal history? And the answer is, well, let's just go back to 2018, and he makes a trip to visit settlements in Israel. And this speech he gave in 2018 in Jerusalem here, advocating for the rebuilding of a third temple and the return of the red heifer. Believe it or not, Pete Hegseth is a member, if you will, of this cult. Go ahead. This is from 2018.
And today, Jennifer and I and others had a chance to go see the western wall of the Temple Mount, the western wall tunnels, so much of the old city. And as you stand there, you can't help but behold the miracle before you. And it got me thinking about another miracle that I hope all of you don't see too far away. Because 1917 was a miracle, 1948 was a miracle, 1967 was a miracle, 2017, the declaration of Jerusalem as the capital, was a miracle. And there's no reason why the miracle of the reestablishment of the temple on the Temple Mount is not possible. I don't know how it would happen. You don't know how it would happen, but I know that it could happen. That's all I know. And a step in that process, a step in every process, is the recognition that facts and activities on the ground truly matter. And that's why going and visiting Judea and Samaria, understanding that sovereignty, the very sovereignty of Israeli soil, and Israeli cities, locations, is a critical next step to showing the world that this is the land for Jews and the land of Israel. And I believe, as was mentioned, he said you need to, what was mentioned is you need to buy the ticket. Don't just wish for 40 years to win the lottery, buy the ticket. I would submit to you, in light of the support you have in Washington, D.C., the support you have amongst patriotic Americans, amongst evangelical Christians, amongst believers, amongst Republicans, even amongst some Democrats who can barely say it anymore in Washington. Buy the ticket, take your action, do what needs to be done here in Israel, because I truly believe this is a moment where America will have your back. You have Donald Trump in the White House, you have Mike Pence as Vice President, you have Nikki Haley at the UN, you have true believers in Israel and America that have your back.
So, true believers. So, if there's any doubt as to why Hegseth was selected by Mary Adelson and shortlisted for Trump's transition team for this role, that's your evidence right there. He was identified as a absolute irreplaceable young talent at that very moment, and that's what we're seeing here now. This comes at a time where there are reports surfacing, people complaining to independent groups about proselytizing within the U.S. military, and this is from an Al Jazeera documentary called "Praying for Armageddon," and just gives you a look into the systemic problem that is developing within the U.S. military command structure. We'll go ahead and roll this.
Most of the young people that come into the military are there probably because they're trying to figure out who they are. From an evangelistic standpoint, I've always referred to them as ripe as black bananas.
Chaplains are increasingly coming from the fundamentalist sects. These evangelical fundamentalist chaplains go to some place where basic training graduates, and they say beforehand in their meeting, these troops are at their most vulnerable. They've been racked and trained to death. Go get them.
Now for the Holy Spirit. We try to reach our recruits immediately. There are 450,000 recruits in the freshman class of this next year's armed forces. That's going through boot camp. We will touch about 200,000 of them this next year.
They had something like 70 baptisms at Fort Jackson. at the end of basic training exercises. And they proselytize and they get them, they take them down and baptize them, and then they're part of the Christian nationalists.
So, in this documentary also features Mikey Weinstein. He's the head of an organization called Military Religious Freedom Foundation, where he's lodging the complaints of thousands of U.S. military members, including currently active duty right now, that are saying they're being pressured or they're being persecuted or being given a hard time because they're not Christian enough, and that this is becoming a problem within the ranks of the U.S. military under the Trump administration. This has really flourished, this type of situation. Here's another clip as well. And I mean, this is just, we'll leave the link to this documentary in the show notes. It's just required viewing, but this next clip is quite stunning, and you'll see more of the Crusader iconography, but go ahead.
In the media, we've seen images of Crusader symbols, of Christian symbols, of units deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan.
We had 138 U.S. Marines that came to us in Helmand province in Afghanistan. They were walking into the villages out there, and the village elders, most of them hadn't even heard of 9/11, but they'd heard of what I ended up calling the Jesus rifle. A company called Trijicon, based out of Michigan. They had about a $2 billion contract to make rifle scopes for our military. On the scopes, if you look closely, were biblical citations from the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Revelation. It was burned into the scope. Now think of the optics of American soldiers shooting Muslims in Afghanistan through the scopes that have the New Testament citations. These are Air Force fighters that can carry nuclear weapons. Complete Crusader iconography, complete with the helmet, the three cross-shaped stars, of course the sword and the crucifix. All stuff like this does is completely motivate the recruiting efforts of Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, ISIS, the Mujahideen, and the Taliban. How do they refer to America? The Crusaders. This doesn't help.
So this is how some of these weapons are being marketed right now. So you see a level of religious extremism, fanaticism, and Christian nationalism being infused into the U.S. military, led by clearly a religious fanatic, Pete Hegseth, and who renamed the Department of Defense the Department of War. Why would you rename a government department, the Department of War, unless you're intending on waging wars? And this is exactly what we're seeing now. So it shouldn't surprise anybody what we're all witnessing, what's unfolding now. And this is being portrayed, and again, in some of these complaints, that this is a holy war, that this war against Iran on behalf of Israel, from a Christian Zionist point of view, commanders are telling them this is a holy war against Iran. And this is documented now. And this is now finally making the rounds and getting press coverage, but it had been under the radar for so long. And there's many key organizations, and one of them here, which is featured in this report, as well as in Freddie Ponton's report at 21st Century Wire, the Jewish Institute for National Security of America. And if you go to their website, and it's quite interesting, you see they have these exchange programs. So they're bringing U.S. officers to Israel for indoctrination, and then they spend time over there. And the IDF also have outreach organizations. So driving this movement through the American military is also these Israeli organizations that seem to be there to help steer this process. And I personally think this has been a big influence in this becoming more prevalent within the U.S. Military here. But you go to the website, which we've put links in the show notes as well for people to see for themselves. But again, go to the 21st Century Wire report by Freddie Ponton, some great journalism that he's put together there. And the evidence is just overwhelming. It's shocking, in fact. But over to you, Mike.
Patrick, then there was the issue of Purim.
Well, Purim being the Jewish holiday and festival. I mean, I think Basil has also been looking in to this connection as well. Certainly, this is something that needs to be explained, I think.
Okay, Basil, just very briefly then, if you could just give us a brief explanation of Purim and why that's relevant to what Patrick's been covering here.
Well, Purim celebrates the slaughter of a previous generation of Iranians, supposedly at least, as documented in the Book of Esther, dating back 2,300 years. And on Fox News this week, a notable rabbi used the occasion to celebrate and double down on the elimination of these negative people in Iran. It was really quite extraordinary stuff. And of course, worth remembering that this war itself started just a couple of days before Purim, and people have pointed out that a lot of other wars that Israel has started have had similar timing. But let's roll this clip here from Fox News.
Shirin Yadigar and Rabbi Chaim Mentz, what do you think comes next in Iran? Will we see regime change, Sheila?
I do think we're going to see regime change. I don't think that we've lost all of these Iranian lives, lost American soldiers, lost Israeli lives to remain with the same status quo. Absolutely not.
Rabbi.
There's definitely going to be a regime change. But I got to say, today, 2,300 years ago, the entire Iran negative people were wiped out. And therefore, we give presents. In the name of Purim and everybody of the Nightcat crew.
Oh,
happy Purim.
Look at this. So there'll be a toast after, a genuine one. Shirin, thank you, Rabbi. That's very kind.
You got it.
Oh, yes, absolutely. There will be a regime change.
Absolutely ghoulish, if you ask me. Yet celebrated on national television there in the United States. It's the reference to negative people. You know, that's what they are. So they must all be wiped out. Everybody in agreement about that over at Fox.
Yes, Basil, very grim. Okay, now UK Column only operates with your help, and if you possibly can help us financially, then please get onto the UK Column website and have a look to see what ways there are that you can support us. If you can't support us financially, please do share this program and any of our material, because that helps us beat the censorship regime. Thank you once again to everybody that's helping us in any way. Tonight at 7 p.m., Charles and I are speaking to Jeremy on the broader implications of the attack on Iran. On Sunday, for members only, is part 2 of the 1,000 Words podcast. Doc Malik being the person being painted on this particular occasion. So join that program at 7 p.m. on Sunday for fantastic discussion yet again. Now, the UK Counter Terrorism Police have decided to launch a digital campaign aimed at teenage boys to highlight what they describe as the real-world consequences of sharing harmful extremist content online. Now, depending on the case, the consequences of being convicted under the Terrorism Act, they say, can include sentences in prison or young offenders institutions, depending on their age, community orders, including tagging, curfews, restrictions on movement, confiscation of electronic devices, and long-term restrictions on travel to some foreign countries, as well, of course, as problems with attending college, university, or getting a job, and so on. So anyway, they have produced 2 videos for sharing on the various platforms, particularly targeting teenage boys. Let's just have a look at one of them.
I just got all my devices taken away by the police. My mum couldn't believe it. I might get a criminal record and not be able to go to college. I only shared a link. I just thought it was funny. But it was terrorist content. And that is not a game. It's real life.
So let's bring on screen the counterterrorism website and just show you what they were saying in this. What you share leaves a trace. Counter Terrorism Policing's What You Share Leaves a Trace campaign is aimed at 13 to 17-year-old boys at risk of being caught up in terrorist offending. It's been designed in response to increasing numbers of teenage boys being arrested for and convicted of terrorist offences in the UK, often connected to accessing and sharing extremist content on social media. The campaign is on TikTok and YouTube. As we know, where there are large numbers of teenage boys spend their time and are most effective at delivering messages to this audience. So, Basil, just very briefly, I'm looking at this in the context of the prescription of Palestine Action, for example. But the style of the videos that these guys are pushing out is in and of themselves fairly terrorizing.
Absolutely scary stuff, Mike. And I noticed in that statement you read that the word extremist was substituted for terrorist when referring to whatever it was that boys are accused of sharing. The idea being that counter narratives, which can therefore be characterized as extremist because they go against whatever the government is pushing, can then be further recategorized as terrorist. But in fact, they are nothing of the kind. They are simply counter to the official pro-genocide narrative that the UK government endorses, of course. It's really bizarre stuff. And that boy, interesting notice, called ACT, his acting, well, he deserves some kind of award because he's extremely effective, but in a really chilling way. I think it's child abuse, frankly, to even put a boy through doing that, spouting that total garbage and simply spreading fear amongst a particularly vulnerable group of teenage boys.
Absolutely. So clearly designed to shut down spread of information and so on, and perhaps protest. But the BBC's been up to the same kind of thing.
Well, the BBC's are always up to this kind of thing. It's Nick Robinson in this case, who, in a conversation with an Anglo-Iranian actress, questioned whether or not anti-war protests in Britain should be banned, believe it or not. He certainly seems to think so. And this is part of a pattern, really, because after that, it was earlier this week, that Mohsin Ali was accused in the House of Commons of attending a pro-Khamenei rally. And the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, refused to rebut the Tory MP who made the accusation. And as a result, Ali has had death threats. Now, he was, in fact, attending a Stop the War CND rally. But that was deliberately mischaracterized. He's challenged the MP in question to repeat the accusation outside the House of Commons, which he hasn't done yet. Of course, Commons immunity means you can get away with saying pretty much anything. It remains to be seen whether Mohsin Ali gets an apology from Keir Starmer, who made derogatory remarks about the direction the Green Party was going, the Tory MP in question being Alex Shelbrooke.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's consider the issue of empire and colonialism for a second. I just wanted to make some comment about this particular article from the Daily Skeptic. It's headlined, Lewis Hamilton, Africa must unite and take control back from the British. So it's talking about some of the comments that Hamilton has made. But it was promoted in a tweet by Toby Young here, posting that Lewis Hamilton says Africa must unite and take back from the French, the Spanish, the Portuguese and the British, apparently unaware that the British Empire withdrew from Africa 60 years ago. And I can't believe that Toby Young is unaware that Hamilton is mostly right on this, and any suggestion that handing over political control to a bunch of corrupt puppets means that the British Empire withdrew when it patently didn't is absurd. For example, this report by Mark Curtis found that 101 companies listed on the London Stock Exchange, mainly British, have mining operations in 37 sub-Saharan African countries, controlling an estimated $1.05 trillion worth of resources in just 5 commodities: oil, gold, diamonds, coal and platinum, never mind rare earths. Of those 101 companies, 1/4 are incorporated in tax havens. And the report goes on to talk about a revolving door between the British political establishment and British mining companies, with at least 5 British government officials taking up seats on the boards of these mining companies operating in Africa. And they talk about companies like Rio Tinto and Glencore and Vedanta, of course, whose activities have been associated with the displacement of communities. I think Basil was talking about that earlier. Labour rights violations and environmental degradation and tax avoidance. And this is why Tony Blair, of course, is so determined to compete for influence in sub-Saharan Africa, in the Sahel. So, this idea that the British Empire ever left is ridiculous. Politically, perhaps. Economically, financially, absolutely not. Okay. Basil, we'll just have to move on here for a second, because we want to highlight this article in the Canary entitled "Watch, Starmer's Transparency Minister Must Resign for Protecting Palantir." Now, we're going to show the first minute or so of a video clip here. Let's just watch this, Basil, and then we'll get your comments on it.
We've identified a major conflict of interest at the heart of the Cabinet Office that requires either a recusal or a resignation. The man at the centre of all of this is Chris Ward. He's the government's Minister for Transparency, but he also wears a second hat as the Minister for Government Commercial Function. Right now, he's acting as a one-man firewall, blocking the truth about Lord Mandelson and the tech giant Palantir. Because he's curating his own history, Chris Ward must step aside or he must go. This is how the firewall works. Parliament has ordered the release of every email and WhatsApp between Number 10 and Peter Mandelson. But the government has made Chris Ward the official gatekeeper for those files. Ward is the one scoping the documents. He decides what's relevant and what's sensitive. If he marks a file as a national security risk, it gets buried. And where does it go? It goes to the Intelligence Committee, chaired by Lord Beamish. The person deciding what to hide, Chris Ward, is the PM's former right-hand man. The person overseeing the secrets, Lord Beamish, is a man ennobled by the PM just months ago. It isn't oversight, it's a closed loop of loyalty.
It's very hard to argue with that, Basil. An absolutely spectacular report. Now, the link will be in the show notes, but I absolutely urge everybody to watch the full thing. But what are your thoughts?
Well, Chris Ward was parachuted into the Brighton-Kemp Town constituency over the wishes of the local Labour Party because he's a dyed-in-the-wool Blairite. What he's done here is failed to designate Palantir as a strategic supplier, even though the scale of its annual revenue from the UK government and the key roles it is supposed to fulfil both mean it should be, because under the government's own strategic supplier risk management rules, any company with more than £100 million worth of contracts with the UK government should be designated as such. So, when you stick that together with what we heard in that report about his key role in deciding what and what isn't revealed about Peter Mandelson's relationship, not only with Palantir, of course, but with Epstein, then you've got a typical new Labour mess, haven't you? Another farrago of corruption. So it's hoped that, following McSweeney and the others that have gone, that Chris Ward certainly should be forced out. But I'm hearing that in Westminster, even though technically out of power, the likes of McSweeney are continuing through Labour Together, in spite of the enormous pressure it's been under, to try and hang on to the reins of power inside the Labour Party and therefore in the corridors of government.
Yeah, thank you, Basil. Patrick, let's come back onto war then, unfortunately, but we need to do this. So you want to have a look at an exercise that was run at the couple of years after, or 1 year after 9/11, certainly, but Iran being the sort of key central theme.
Yeah, well, we're going to get into this AI conversation here with the Pentagon, but this is a military exercise here up on screen that a lot of people will reference when they're talking about, should the U.S. or what would happen if the U.S. engaged in a full-blown war with Iran, and of course, the Millennium Challenge as you mentioned, Mike, of 2002, and it didn't end well for the U.S. military. Now, I have to add a very important point here, and this is something that has changed. There's a new variable that war game that was calculated, and Rand Corporation, these other think tanks, military think tanks as well. They do these type of exercise and war game exercise, the Pentagon as well. But a new variable has come into play, which is that those war games are predicated on the assumption that the United States, or in the case of Israel, would not go completely scorched earth and have no regard for civilian casualties by bombing densely populated urban areas. Because that does change the trajectory of a conflict. And so now you have that variable that has been introduced after October 7th. And that changes these war. So we can't really necessarily reference these war games as being accurate portrayals of what we're seeing now, because of this change in doctrine by the U.S. and by Israel, and by extension, U.S. allies, including Britain. Because as Basil and you both said previously, Britain's deeply involved in the genocide in Gaza as an enabler and a facilitator for Israel. And so that brings us to another new variable, which is that who is making the decisions on targeting? Is it humans or is it AI? We'll bring up this report here. This is Evolving AI. This is an account I follow on Instagram here. A study finds ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini deployed tactical nuclear weapons in 95% of 21 simulated war game scenarios and never surrendered. Okay, even if their opponents were engaged using any kind of nuclear weapons, it didn't deter the AI from still moving forward to try to find a way here. And so this was done by King's College here. And 21 simulated crisis scenarios designed to mirror military standoffs. The system had to make strategic decisions under pressure, including whether to escalate or step back. In 20 of 21 simulations, at least one model chose to deploy tactical nuclear weapons, which equals 95% of cases. None of the models chose to surrender. Very important here, even when facing heavy losses or risk of retaliation. That's pretty shocking, certainly. But so the question is the current U.S. military devolving this decision-making to AI? And we'll go back to show you the actual paper here. But the paper published by ARXIV suggests that while these models can show structured reasoning in crisis settings, their decisions are often lean towards escalation rather than restraint. That is the AI quality in decision making. The findings do not mean AI systems are autonomous military actors, but they raise serious questions about how such tools might behave if used in the real world of defense planning decision support. But actually, no, the controversy with Anthropic AI and the Pentagon, Pete Hegseth himself dismissing Anthropic and banning it from government contracts because the owners of that company did not want to be involved in this sort of kill role and allowing AI to make autonomous decisions in terms of killing humans. And so they were then ostracized for this. And Sam Altman and OpenAI came immediately into the breach there to fill that gap for the Pentagon and Pete Hegseth with no qualms or morals at all about whether that's ethical or not. Here is the paper, just so people know, and we can put a link as well into the show notes of this. This is published up here, and this was published on Cornell University's website, but that's the study, okay? So we have a genuine problem here. If you go to the Joint Operations Center for Gaza, there are U.S. and Israeli commanders there together, and this is joint operations, the same with Iran. And so how much of AI is involved in this sort of scorched earth bombing that we're currently watching, identifying buildings as potential terrorist targets? So the AI is only as good as the inputs it's getting from the designers of these military operations. And it's quite stunning. What you're seeing, that hellscape in Gaza that we all know and that we've all seen, that's a result largely, my feeling is that's also a result of devolving decision-making and targeting to AI systems. That's what you get. And that's exactly what you'll see in Iran, which is unfolding right now. It's absolutely abhorrent on so many different levels. And there needs to be, I think, a lot more attention brought to this problem. Otherwise, what we're facing as humanity, I think we're going down a very dark road right now. And this could end in a nuclear or thermonuclear exchange or a one-way nuclear deployment against Iran if with this over-reliant nature with AI.
Thank you for that, Patrick. Now let's just put a little bit of meat on that. So if we remind ourselves from last week, what Charles was reporting, this was that the Pentagon had originally threatened to cancel Anthropic's contract by Friday of the week before last if the company didn't lift safeguards. So he met with the Anthropic CEO and so on. If you remember, we reported that at that point. And then if you remember, just one day later, Anthropic effectively reversed that decision and made a deal. And as Patrick's just mentioned, Sam Altman has also made a deal, saying on X, tonight we reached an agreement with the Department of War to deploy our models in their classified network. Two of our most important safety principles are prohibitions on domestic mass surveillance and human responsibility for the use of force, including for autonomous weapons systems. The Department for War agrees with these principles, reflects them in law and policy, and we put them in our agreement. So that's all right then, so long as the Department of War agrees. And then finally, he said, we remain committed to serve all of humanity as best we can. Well, we'll talk much more about this in Extra, but I've no doubt I don't believe a word of that. But I just want to finish off with this, because the Iranian IRGC posted on Telegram talking about a couple of issues, but related to the use of AI in particular, and the fact that they were claiming to have bombed both Amazon and Microsoft data centers. Now, Amazon, of course, did have some downtime, and so they couldn't really hide what had happened to their data center. There's no confirmation either way about what's happened with Microsoft. But the question is, why would these data centers be being targeted by Iran in the first place? And if we just bring that one back on screen again for a second, this is Microsoft talking about the fact that Microsoft's Azure cloud infrastructure is absolutely used for military purposes. Now, if we go back to 2003 with the Iraq War in 2003, the illegal Iraq War in 2003, we had headlines like this in the BBC: US cautions Iraq on human shields. And General Myers was absolutely suggesting that Saddam Hussein was responsible for war crimes if he attempted to use people to put people in the way of harm in Iraq to try to convince the United States not to attack and so on. But, the question in my mind is, this issue of dual use is one that has been an issue for a very long time. And let's bring Ben Wallace on screen here, because we've quoted him as saying this: we'll ensure that we embed dual use at the heart of our capability management processes. And this is right through the military industrial complex at the moment. We're seeing civilian telecommunications networks being used for military planning and military communications. We're seeing civilian AI systems now being used for military purposes. And of course, what does that do? That effectively makes us all, as ordinary members of the public, human shields, because of course, any opponent in a war system, in a war scenario, is going to be targeting civilian infrastructure, which is being used for war purposes. We have all become human shields. Now, in 2003, that was considered a war crime by the United States and by the United Kingdom governments. But somehow it's not a war crime anymore. We'll talk more about that in Extra, but we've got to leave it there for today. I want to say thank you to Basil and to Patrick for joining me today, and for everybody that's watched. If you're UK Column members, stay on the live stream for Extra. If you're not a member, maybe you would consider joining us for News Extra every time we do a news program. But anyway, don't forget Germ tonight at 7 p.m. 1,000 Words podcast at 7 p.m. on Sunday, and we'll be back for another news program at 1 p.m. on Monday as usual. We'll see you then. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.